Hello, everyone. My name is Jason Tozier. My name sign is JT. And we've been focusing a lot on mental health and some important topics this month. I have with me today Amber Vlangas, who works with the Restorative Action Alliance, known as RAA. Amber, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be able to speak with you today.
I am as well. So Amber is a civil rights activist. She's a survivor of sexual harm and a speaker and an advocate for reimagining our criminal legal system. Ms. Vlangas is a graduate student pursuing a degree in public administration with a concentration on law and public policy. Her research interests and her life experience center around the impacts of the public registration requirements and offender management practices on the reintegration of returning citizens, interpersonal and state violence prevention, and the safety of our communities. She's a strong believer in the power of human connection and effective storytelling to create positive change. Ms. Vlangas is a veteran of the United States Marine Corps, and she has over 20 years of experience in marketing, fundraising, public relations for a variety of nonprofit organizations. She's participated in the grassroots level with the ACLU Smart Justice campaign, the Center for Rational Justice Studies, and Healing Connections Restorative Justice Conference, as well as others. She's a frequent speaker and a panelist for presentations all over the country that explore the collateral consequences of criminal convictions and public registries. And she's here to talk with us today. Are you ready, Amber?
I'm ready.
Wonderful. So as a survivor, can you talk to me a little bit about what the Regional Action Alliance is?
So the Restorative Action Alliance is a group of anti-carceral survivors, as well as people who've been impacted by the legal system, restorative justice practitioners, people working in the legal field. So a lot of people from a lot of different walks of life that have come together and basically said, we really would like to see an end to sexual violence and also state violence that we have created as a response to it as well. So we use 3 different components in our work. We do legislative advocacy, we do education, and we do litigation projects. We're a fairly new organization. We were founded in 2020 as a result of coming together at an event. And we realized that in our area, which is New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, there were a lot of groups that were kind of marching in the same direction. And we decided to join forces to really make some good change.
It's so important. We need more of that all over the country. You know, the things that you've done and the things that you're now able to do are just, they're wonderful, amazing.
I appreciate that.
Now, in all states, people who are convicted of certain crimes are required to register on a sex offender registry. I'm going to use the acronym SOR. This registry is viewable by the public. This allows people to view a picture and address of the registered offender. And today's sex offender registry lists almost 1 million people in the United States. This can limit employment opportunities, affect personal relationships, and their ability to live without fear of being harassed. Can you talk to me a little bit about these consequences?
So, I mean, in terms of, we didn't really talk about, I am personally affected by the registry in that my husband is required to register. So in unrelated incidents and completely different life experiences, not only am I a survivor of sexual harm, I also have experienced the negative effects as a family member of somebody who is required to register. So when we talk about the registry and what it does to our families and our communities, when someone is on that registry, it affects their entire family and everyone around them. It affects their ability to be able to contribute to the community and how they're viewed in the community. So as the spouse of someone who's required to register, I have been affected in my own relationships with other people. My children have been affected, and it just ripples out to everyone who is supportive and loves someone on the registry. So I think that people don't really realize, who are not familiar, that the solution that we're providing is doing more harm than good.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, I can be a little more specific in terms of personal
Sure.
consequences, if you'd like to hear an example.
Please, sure.
So, I have multiple examples because the truth of the matter is that everyday living is affected for the entire family. I like to use examples that involve my children, because being a parent on the who is on the registry is very difficult. So I'll give this example. We had a situation where my son, who is in elementary school, forgot something at school. At home. And so my husband does drive him to school, and he drops him off, and that's fully within what he's allowed to do. However, he is not allowed to walk into the school. So, if my son forgets something in the car or he forgets something at home, it becomes problematic because he can't go into the school to drop something off. So, that's one example. My daughter, who is in high school, she transferred from a small school to a larger school when she was in high school. And she was having some transition problems because, that happens to all children when they kind of go from a smaller setting to a larger setting. It's high school, it's new. So we thought it would be a wonderful thing to meet with her guidance counselor. So we got all their permissions from probation and this and that. We were familiar with the school because my older daughter had gone there. We've been there so many times before. We go to the office, my husband and myself, and you have to sign in and give your ID. And so I give my ID, everything's fine. And then my husband gives his ID, the woman runs it through the computer, and her eyes just get as large as saucers. And she starts waving her arms. And she says, "I need security here." So what happens is security comes to the office, and in a very public way, in a hallway filled with my daughter's peers, escort us to the guidance office. Thank goodness my daughter was already in the office, so she didn't witness it. But this was definitely not the way to have her adjusting to a new school, nor were we aware that that was going to happen. Otherwise, we may not have had my husband attend. But these are the types of things that children of registrants endure because of the stigma and the fear that has been created by a lot of different, society at large, the government, the media, all of those things have created that fear. And the truth of the matter is that my husband was probably more in danger in going into that school than any child ever was.
Thank you for bringing that up. We'll talk a little bit more about stigma a little bit further on in the program, because you're absolutely right. That stigma impacts everyone. So I feel for your children. I'm sure that they've gone through a lot of bullying and comments that they've heard from classmates at school, and they just have to carry that around. It's very difficult. So I just read an article in the New York Law Journal back in March of this year. It was written by Kristen N. Russell, who's an assistant professor of justice studies at Prairie View A&M in Texas, and Daniel Pollack, who's a professor at Yeshiva University at their School of Social Work. And they wrote this quote. They said that society often extends its stigmatized views of a quote unquote deviant person to those who are most immediately associated with them. And the term for this is courtesy stigma. So those who commit sexual offenses are undoubtedly the most stigmatized of all criminal offenders. So it's not surprising that their family members and the partners of registrants experience significant courtesy stigma. Can you talk a little bit about how this courtesy stigma is becoming a larger and larger social issue?
I'm sorry, I had a little bit of a breakup on the back of that question. Could you repeat the last part of the question?
Sure, I was talking about courtesy stigma, and why is courtesy stigma becoming a larger and larger societal issue?
Well, I think that, as you already said, we have right now in our country almost 1 million people who are on the registry. So just by sheer numbers, when you talk about people who are affected or in the inner circle of people who are required to register, there's a lot of people. It's becoming a larger problem because we have a lot of different movements out there that are particularly targeting people on the registry, and politics that is utilized to create fear, because that's kind of the low-hanging fruit that we all fear. You know, when you think about your children or you think about your personal safety, and being violated in a sexual manner is something that we all fear. So that is fueled by a lot of different things. And so it's becoming a problem because, like I said, that ripples out to the family. And so as families are being essentially destroyed and stigmatized, then that creates additional problems. So if you think about the children of registrants or the spouses of registrants, they're going to experience things like depression, anger, all sorts of different things that are a result of the situation that they're in that can cause further societal problems, addiction, things like that. So I think that courtesy stigma is a very big part of that. I get sometimes from people that, I've made a choice. So, I've made a choice to, stay with somebody who committed harm and should essentially be canceled. But what I've made a choice is to support someone that I love and to support an end to sexual harm in a way that's going to be effective. So by that nature, that stigma is extended to me because I've made that choice. Does that make sense?
It sure does. Absolutely. And we see courtesy stigma and stigma affecting people like you all the time. So thank you for verbalizing that. There's another major study that was published in the American Economic Review, which measured an average of 4% home value loss for homes within 1/10 of a mile from a registered sex offender. So is it necessary to dehumanize people in this way in the name of hate?
I don't think it does. And I think that you bring up a good point about how public registration and the stigma affects economics. So when we talk about how individuals who have served their time and who are trying to reintegrate into the community, so whether you're talking about the registry or anybody with a criminal record, we are cutting ourselves off at the knees because we are not allowing people to reach their full potential in terms of employment, and not just employment, but also giving back to their communities. So, I'll give you an example of that. So my husband and I, we were very involved in our Veterans Association. We're very involved in a lot of nonprofit work. And some of those things are very limited for him now because of, for instance, the Veterans Association working with the Boy Scouts. So that's not something he can participate in. Or, even just in your community, there are times where maybe we wouldn't stop and help somebody who is stranded on the side of the road, where typically we would have done that prior to his conviction. So it limits a lot of things in a lot of ways in terms of people giving back to our economy and our communities.
Absolutely. And that's the issue with stigma, is that it does limit people in those ways. It really controls what we can do and what we can't do. That idea that eyes are on you all the time. We've paid our debt to society and we're ready to move on, but we're not allowed to. And it feels like for every one step forward, you get 2 steps back. Yeah, there's very much a feeling of being stuck and limited. So Brian Goldstone was quoted as saying, "Real transformative change will only occur when we stop perpetuating this contrast that's so endemic to our current discourse between good and bad criminals, between those deserving of basic dignity and a second chance, and those monstrous, quote unquote, super predators, to use Clinton's infamous term, who can then be left to wither away and die." And America, as we know, has the largest mass incarceration with about 25% of prisoners. As the Equal Justice Initiative has shown, that they rake in about $182 billion every year. This is from the Without Adding Much to Public Safety. And I'd like to ask you, how would we transform society in a harm-free manner?
So I think that one of the things that we really need to focus on is really upholding and holding space for every person's humanity. And it's very difficult for us to do that within the confines of our current criminal legal system. So when you talk about the different communities that are harmed by the criminal legal system, you see that it disproportionately affects individuals of color, individuals with mental health issues, individuals who are poor. So there's a lot of intersectionality there that sometimes, as we're trying to reform, we are in our silos. So we really need to all work together in terms of transforming and imagining what could be. So what we're doing right now is clearly not working, because what we're doing is utilizing the tools of violence to combat violence. And so what I mean by that is, when you think about what drives violence, as Danielle Sered talks about a lot, she says the drivers of violence are shame, isolation, an inability to meet someone's economic needs, and exposure to violence. And then when you think about incarceration and our systems, including the public registry, those are the exact tools of that system as well. So what we're doing is very counterproductive. If we want to imagine something different, we can't say, well, let's just kind of change what we're doing. Let's tweak around the edges. Let's do this or that. We have to completely reimagine and dismantle what we're doing, because we're just perpetuating the exact conditions that perpetuate violence, and particularly sexual violence.
And for the interpreter, can you clarify who said those things?
It's Danielle Sered. So she wrote the book Until We Reckon, and she does a lot of great work with a program called Common Justice in New York.
Yeah, that book just came out, right?
It's been out for a couple of years. One book that I
Okay, maybe it's a different one I'm thinking of.
One book that I recommend that did just come out that I recommend to many people is We'll Do This Till We Free Us by Miriam Kaba. And she really talks in her book a lot about how we, if we have a distaste for a certain person because of lived experience, or we have a distaste for someone, we can't give in to those carceral impulses that rear their ugly heads, even as reformers or abolitionists. So, you know, that seems to be a struggle for many people. And I have to say, even for myself, I struggled for a while with, I thought the registry was perfectly acceptable. I thought it was helping us. Because of my own experience of victimization, I had a distaste for anybody who would be able to commit harm against someone else, because I didn't understand it. And so I think education is key, because more than anything, what survivors want is to know that this is not going to happen to someone else. And the way that we do that is to make sure that we're changing the conditions, we're changing the culture, and we're understanding why it happens and making everyone whole again. Because when everybody's whole again, we can't imagine, or it's just unfathomable to commit this type of violence. So that's where we have to get to.
Absolutely. We have to abolish this scarlet letter that we carry around for the rest of our lives. And like you said, through education, through sharing our experiences and our examples. I think there are a lot of people like you who think that the registry is fine and good, but it's not until they're educated and they understand all of the repercussions it can have that they can see how it really affects us. So thank you so much for being here and sharing your story.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Now, in a Human Rights Watch article, it was quoted that 17 states have a registration for life. And yet we know that former sex offenders are less likely to reoffend the longer they live offense-free. And in an article called Rethinking Sex Offender Registries by Eli Lehrer, he writes, 12 states require registration for urination in public, 6 states for prostitution-related offenses, and teenagers who have consensual sex with other teenagers can be forced to register, sometimes for life, in 29 states. Most disturbingly, about 40 states put juveniles on the sex offender registry. And Nicole Pittman of Impact Justice found that 6 states can require those juveniles to be registered for life. So registered for life, how do we solve that issue? We know that that causes more harm than good, correct?
Yes. So I think that the idea that we are imposing any sort of sanctions on anybody for a full lifetime is just not in touch with human nature or reality. In a country that purports to be the land of second chances, the land of freedom, this is just counterproductive to our aspirations. So when we think about meaningful ways to allow people to return to society and to re-enter after either incarceration or a period of probation, parole, surveillance, whatever you want to call it, we have to provide the tools to have them being successful. And we know that registration is very counterproductive for people. It does not allow them to maintain employment. It often restricts where they can live. And so all of those things are very destructive. When you think about a lifetime, I often call the registry the social death penalty. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. There are people who succeed in spite of this system. There are many people who are required to register who are doing great things. However, our government is basically saying to people, avoid these people are dangerous. None of this is always grounded in truth. And I think that anything for a lifetime is just not productive. We need to be providing people 100% abolishing the registry, and in the absence of the political will to do that, a meaningful path off of the registry. When individuals are living crime-free in the community, as you mentioned, when we look at even the most heinous of offenses, 15 years living in the community brings somebody back to the point of risk that somebody who never committed an offense. So the idea that we need a lifetime of surveillance and control is just not in line with the science. So we need to stop these counterproductive policies that are based on fear and emotion and the appearance of safety and not actual safety. They're actually making our communities less safe by creating those conditions that we talked about before: isolation, shame, and the inability to meet someone's economic needs, and exposure to violence. I mean, we can talk about people who have encountered vigilante violence as a result of the registry. It seems to be, this is just anecdotal. I don't have the statistics in front of me, but even just in the past year, there have been multiple incidences of people who have encountered vigilante justice from people who thought that they were meting out justice for society by harming somebody on the registry.
Absolutely. Actually, you read my mind because that segues to what I was going to talk about in about 1 minute. So we're both on the same page with this. So in the book, Hate Crimes in Cyberspace, written by Danielle Keats-Citrone. Here's the book.
I haven't read that. I'm going to have to do that.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. So she writes that experts predict that as many as 40% of all Americans will be digitally shamed. And for sex offender registrants, that number is more like 100%. And like you said, to be a lifetime registrant, that's the rest of your life. And make no mistake that the pain of cyber shaming can wreak havoc on one's mental health. You talked about vigilantism. What can we do about this public shaming, about this vigilantism, about this state-sanctioned violence against people on the sex offender registry? I'd like to tell you my experience. There was another deaf person, who created a vlog a few years ago. And in their vlog, it was about me. they said that 6 feet under was not nearly deep enough for me, that it would be better for my body to be thrown out of a grave and to let animals feast on my remains. So how do we reduce or conquer the state-sanctioned violence from these vigilantes?
Well, the short answer is abolish the registry. So I know that that's a complex answer, and that is, we could possibly be far off from that. The more complicated answer is that we need not believe the lies of individuals who, and the system in telling us that, we need to be 6 feet under. And those type of things. So as somebody living on the registry, it's important to maintain that center in terms of understanding that just because somebody is required to register, whether they've committed harm, their conviction is incorrect, or whatever it is, the registry, make no mistake, is state violence against people. I like to tell people when they look at things like politician statements, or they look at things in the media, just replace the word sex offender or predator or felon with the word human and read the piece again. And if you feel that what is happening to the person in that media report, or the way a person is being talked about, and you're appalled by it, then you need to rethink, because most people will be, the way that individuals are talked about or shamed, or, especially on social media and all of that. If you believe that no human should be treated that way, that includes people that perhaps you might have a distaste for. And the truth of the matter is, the more that you report those kind of things, you can report it to law enforcement and all of that. It depends on where you are and how they feel about it as to whether they will take action. But I have seen action taken against online harassment of registrants. So I would like people to be encouraged that depending on where you are, there have been times where law enforcement will take action.
Yeah, I'll share another experience I had. A few years ago, I was walking to the store near my home. There was a group of people who knew that I was on the registry, and they started speaking to me, and they threw a cup of a drink in my face. I videoed it on my phone and took off. The police came pretty immediately, and I told them what happened. We got an interpreter. I was able to share my whole story, and I actually filed a hate crime against them. And as we went through that process, I was able to meet with the Attorney General, I guess is their title, and speak with them. And I told them I was on the registry, and they spoke to someone outside of my range of vision, and all of a sudden the whole thing was dropped. So even though initially they were responsive, eventually it was dropped because my name was on the registry. And I don't know what was in that. It could have been gas. You never know what someone's going to throw on you. And because I'm deaf as well, and they were speaking to me in a way that I wasn't able to understand, I was doubly discriminated against. So yeah, things like that happen.
First, I would like to say, I am very sorry that happened to you. And,
Thank you.
I'm definitely not here to say that every time action will be taken. I just think it's important to note for those who are out there living under this oppression, that it's not a reason to remain quiet and to take it. It's individuals like yourself who are telling these stories and bringing these things to light that can help us all move forward.
Right, and I have no tolerance for hate at all. So I will continue to speak out. I won't be silenced. And it's through storytelling, like you said, that we can create positive change. The more we educate people and bring these stories to light. Now, the Juvenile Justice Information Exchange supported an article that's called Sex Offender Registration Doesn't Help Victims, It Hurts Young Offenders. This was written by Malik Pickett and Emily Satifka. I'll spell her name again, Satifka. And they said that youthful sex offenders or youthful sex offender registrants cost the public over $3 billion a year. Rather than investing in preventative programming, victim services, these resources are routinely allocated to carceral and punitive responses. Meanwhile, the research-based social programming and community needs remain underfunded. For example, in 2017, California spent $140 million to register and monitor 3,500 youthful registrants. But in the same year, the budget for prevention programs and victim services was only $46,000. So in addition to the high cost of the registration, these sex offender registries don't advance the public safety goals for which they were created. Only 3 to 5% of these youth who commit sexual offenses are likely to reoffend. So this shows that the registration wastes resources on these individuals who actually pose little to no risk of future harm. So the question that we all know the answer to is, should sex offender registries be abolished and why?
So I appreciate you sharing all of that information. And what I will say to you is, of course, I believe that the registry should be abolished. And you make good points in terms of what you just shared, because I work with a lot of people and a lot of families who share their stories with me. And when you talk about somebody who is a youthful person who's committed sexual harm, you're exactly right. This is not some propensity. Sometimes children are criminalized for normative behavior in terms of curiosities. And the carceral approach to it is very damaging to society as a whole. So we're wasting resources, we're harming families. A lot of these incidents happen within families. They tear families apart, even if they are wanting to take a different approach, a more restorative approach to reconcile their family. Because as much as someone may have harmed someone else, it may be more harmful to rip a child out of a family. And, often mothers are criminalized if a father has harmed because they supposedly knew about it or didn't stop it. Grandmothers have been criminalized for knowing that, their child was having an inappropriate relationship with somebody a year over the age of consent. So there's a lot of, I just have to say, ridiculousness that goes on in terms of criminalization of behavior that could be handled in a more public health approach. So yes, we need to abolish the registry. Not only is it costly, it comes at a huge human cost, particularly for children, which it purports to protect. So in terms of, I was speaking with someone I know fairly well the other day who saw something on the news about a child being snatched from a bus stop and immediately said, well, that's my worst fear, that my 13-year-old son will be walking home from school and, we have 2 sex offenders in our close vicinity. And I'm afraid that this could happen to him. And my response to her was, your son is probably more likely to be placed on a registry than he is to be harmed by those registrants that live near you. And unfortunately, we're getting a false sense of security. We're harming children and adults with this system, and we're perpetuating sexual violence in the process.
Thank you for that. I want to share another book with you, or with the audience as well. And there's a quote from this book that says, yes, hate is profound, complicated, and vexing, as well as ugly and sad, but it's not inevitable. In any given individual or community or institution or system, alongside the hateful history of the world are stories of transcending that hate, of finding peace after genocide, of granting liberty after oppression, even just inching toward equality in the wake of horrific injustice. Hate is no more hardwired into our world than it is into our brains. Change is possible. The opposite of hate is connection. And on that note, Amber, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
So I appreciate you sharing that resource. That is another book that I have not read that will go on my list. And I
highly recommend it.
I really like, your thoughts on the opposite of hate is connection. I co-host a podcast called Amplified Voices with a colleague of mine who tweets at End the Registry. And we really believe that proximity and that storytelling and being able to connect with other people is what breaks down those barriers. And so when you see somebody as human, you can't possibly fully hate them because you see yourself in them. And that connection is what will bring us out of some of the darkness that we've fallen into. And the other thing that I really want to share with the audience before we wrap up is I think it's important to note that just as we do not excuse somebody who has caused harm simply because they have harm in their past, we cannot excuse harm committed against a person because of their criminal past. So we can't exonerate ourselves as a society in committing state harm against people because they have harmed in their past. And that is really important and something that a lot of people can't get to. It's a cancellation. What we need to understand is that there is no us and them. There are not these monsters out there that are lurking in the bushes that are trying to hurt us, because 95% of sexual crimes are perpetrated by somebody who is very close to the victim. So while we're looking on registries and at red dots on a map, we are ignoring the prevention that we could be doing and the things that we could be doing in our own homes and in our schools and in our places of worship to understand why sexual violence occurs. So we need to stop perpetuating that myth of us and them, because we need to understand that we all have the ability to commit harm, but we also have the ability to make things as right as possible, to move forward. Everybody has the capacity for redemption. And what everybody wants is for these types of things to never happen again.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Amber. Thank you for your advocacy and all that you've been doing and all that you will do. I look forward to meeting with you more out there in the world. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.